successful invocation. And I did just forget one small step. As we did in step 3, we need to have the correct stub name again for step 4. So we're just going to make a quick code change again, very straightforward. Just replace the stub name with the one that the server's expecting. Again, just make sure it fits in with the kind of Java compliancy, with the names it expects. So at this point, this is what you would actually expect it to be handed by a developer. This stub that I've created here, once we compile it, this would have been essentially the key that a developer or administrator, however you want to host it, this would have been the key to how you would have communicated with the RMI service. But we've actually started developing our own now. So we've compiled our own stub, and at which point we can start now invocating methods on the server. So we're going to profile method 0, as I said earlier, and we're going to pass in the key which we retrieved in step 3. And now you're going to start seeing how we're going to profile the method prototypes. Okay, so what's actually RMI spy method prototype telling us? Unfortunately, you can't read a lot of this output, so I'll kind of explain it in a bit more detail. I think you can see that. So RMI spy method prototypes is telling you, yeah, there is an Owasp5024 object on the service, and it's attempted to invoke method 0, and what it's actually done is passed a vector object into it, which just fired an object over saying, hey, what's your first parameter? Fired an object, and the server's actually responded saying, no, actually, I want an integer for my first method. So we've just kind of started profiling now. So what we're going to do is update RMI spy method prototype, and you can see here where I've just fired over the vector. So we're going to fire an integer. I'm going to see how the response changes. So you've got to do a slight code modification at the state RMI spy is in. So you quickly recompile, and again, just run it. And now it's accepted an integer. We knew that the RMI service was expecting an integer because of the first run we did on the tool. But now it looks like RMI spy method prototype has crashed. I assure you it hasn't. What is actually happening is that the server is still listening on the socket. It's accepted the first object, but it's saying, well, I was expecting more parameters. So the server's just sitting there now saying, hey, where's the second object? So we can do a quick update to RMI spy method prototype, and again, we'll just fire over a vector, whichever object you feel like. Again, a quick compilation. And now we're going to attempt to profile method 0 again, firing over the integer and a vector. And now the output's changed again. It's said that, hey, yeah, I've accepted the first argument from the integer. For the second argument, you passed me a vector, but I was actually expecting another integer as a second argument to my method. So again, it becomes a kind of a slightly tedious process at the moment. So again, we're just going to do the code update, and it's the same process. We're going to recompile. At this point, I'm going to show you what's actually happening with the server. So the server's still waiting there. And we're going to run, and now you see what's happened. RMI spy method prototype has now determined the method 0 on the server. It knew that it wanted 2 integers. We passed the 2 integers in, and the server responded, actually sending us back a long object. An RMI spy method prototype will tell you the return type of however the server responds, whether it's a custom object, whether it's an object that exists in a Java API, and it's also going to tell you the value stored in the object. So we passed in 2 integers with value 10, and the server responded with a long object with value 20. We can actually see there's been a debug message off the server, which I implemented at the kind of server level. That was me as a developer implementing the business logic layer, and I was saying whenever this method's executed, I'm going to print a debug statement and tell me what values were passed in. It's kind of typical developer technique, just kind of debugging your own software. But we can see that there's been a successful invocation. So based on all that detail, for the method prototypes, we now know that the server is actually hosting a method that has a return type of long, and we're going to call it method 0. There are ways to actually retrieve the method name, but I'm not going to go over that today. And we know that the method 0 on the server takes 2 integers. So we're going to profile another method quickly, just to kind of get into the idea of what's actually happening. So I'm going to rewind the attack code slightly. We're currently passing over 2 integers. I'm just going to go back to firing over my fateful vector. I will do a quick recompile again. And we are going to now start profiling method 1. We know all about method 0, and at that point we can actually start developing our clients and just start concentrating on the first method of the RMI service. And again, similar to the profile of attempting to retrieve the details about method 0, we fired in our object. This time the RMI service for method 1 is saying, no, I was expecting a big decimal as my first parameter. So we're going to pass it our big decimal. You can kind of see how we're dealing with more kind of complex objects. RMI spy method prototype doesn't mind about that. For those of you familiar in Java, everything's an object, so we can kind of talk to all this stuff. So I'm going to fire at the big decimal. I'm going to put a value in as well. Just 20, doesn't matter. The idea is you just fire over an object. And again, the server is waiting. It said, yeah, I've accepted your big decimal, but I still want more data. So we'll quickly finish determining the method prototype. Again, we're talking to method 1. And now we can see that we fired in a vector, and it's saying, no, my second argument for my method, for method 1 on the server, is a string. So we're just going to give it a quick string. We'll send it over a nice message. And again, it's saying, yeah, I've accepted those 2 arguments, but I was still accepting a third parameter. So you can see how it's kind of becoming tedious, but I'm going to talk to you about the development of RMI Spy and how you luckily won't have to do any of this. And there we go. It happened that I just fired off a vector as a third object, and that is what the server was expecting. So method 1 on the server, it was actually expecting a big decimal, a string, a vector, and it responded saying, hey, here's your big decimal object back, I've done all my business logic, and here's value 10. So we've now profiled the second method on the server. Again, the return type was big decimal. I'm just going to call it method 1. And it takes a big decimal, a string, and a vector. And that's a lot of detail from how far we've come. Well, we only knew that there was an RMI service being hosted. And look how much information we've now retrieved about this RMI service. We've actually got all the secrets and actually understand what's kind of going on and the business logic. We know a developer has implemented 2 methods, and we can start invocating these and do exactly what we want to them, pass whatever data, start analyzing the return type, do the methods, throw back certain exceptions if we start to fuzz it or give it specific Java payloads, because we can start attacking the actual developer now. We know developers make mistakes, security is difficult.